Okay, perfect. All right. Well, again, thank you all for joining us today. My name is Eric Broughton. I am a senior safety planner here at DRCOG, Denver Regional Council of Governments, and one of the leads for organizing our Regional Crash Data Consortium, and I'm glad that we have you all along with us today. First thing, going over our agenda, we typically want to just, we don't usually do a full round of introductions because we have a large group and it takes a while, but would be really great to, if you could put your name, any attribution and organization you're with in the chat, and also maybe behind your name if you're able to. And also if there is a question or comment later on, if you raise your hand, we call on you. If you're able to state the organization you're with, that is helpful just for everybody in the room, because while many of us know each other or have been in these before, there's always new people. And so just want to give the opportunity so people know who is around, who might be future connections, and some context for comments. We are going to have unfortunately a very short update from the About STRAC, the Statewide Traffic Record Advisory Committee. We were set to have a presentation from the current chair, but unfortunately I was corresponding with him this week and he is not able to join us today. So I will give just a brief comment on what I understand, but I know there are also some other STRAC members here, so we may have the opportunity to hear a little bit from them as well. After that, my colleague Catherine Rush will be giving a presentation about some of the findings that we have come up with as a result of our current minor update for our Regional Vision Zero plan taking action in Regional Vision Zero. And with that, there'll be an opportunity to provide some feedback. Finally, or following that, I am going to go over a update on where we are with mainly the high and medium priority strategies for the organization, for the consortium, but also talk about some of the steps going on in other projects and other ways that we can use this group to be involved. A brief update on the Crash Data Dashboard will be shared, and then we'll open up the floor for any organization who wants to share anything about where they're at with Crash Data, anything that they're seeing in their communities or at the organization. And then our final kind of item here, just to put everyone's calendar. If you have this calendar invite, you likely have the other one, but our next meeting we're looking at is going to be on July 30th. And so if you do not have that, just reach out to me and I will get that forwarded to you. So as it relates to STRAC, so STRAC is the Statewide Traffic Records Advisory Committee. And so this is an advisory group of 7 state agencies that really work on the gamut of all traffic records. So the scope of their work goes beyond crash into things such as like roadway data, judicial citation, things of that nature. And so they are in the process of doing a strategic plan update. And again, unfortunately, we were going to have a presentation on this, but he's not able to join. I wonder if I just saw Crystal join. I don't want to put you on the spot, Crystal, or maybe Scott. I know Scott's also here. But is anybody from STRAC willing to just give just a couple highlights on the current strategic planning effort going on?
I will actually have to let Scott give the update.
It's such a privilege. Yeah, sorry, I can't get my camera to work. I think at the current time, many of you may or may not know, but STRAC has undergone a new leadership team, and we also have a new traffic records coordinator team on or in position. And so
Scott, I'm not hearing you. Is anyone else able to hear?
I can hear Scott.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Eric. As many of you,
Okay.
so just picking up where I left off, as many of you may or may not know, we have some new leadership and a new TRCM position. And so as a result of that, we have taken the initiative to kind of relaunch a review of the strategic plan to align the STRAC in our next 4 years, if you would, 2 to 4 years, around some change in where we're going to focus our efforts. So it's currently under review, I think is the best way to approach that. And we are trying to define where we want to spend our efforts and how we want to contribute to highway traffic safety. So more to come, not a solid answer today. Does that help, Eric? Or were you able to hear me?
I unfortunately only got the last probably 10 seconds of that, but I think that, I mean, you're the veteran at STRAC, so I think that you probably nailed it. Unless there's anything else another member or particular participant would want to add, I think that probably is good. David?
Yeah, Eric. I could talk a little bit about STRAC as well. Still being part of it, no longer a voting member, but I still participate. But I know part of the plan is just looking at the future and what we need to do, and pertaining to like crash data. We're discussing whether it's the right time for another traffic records assessment. The last one we had was in 2019, so that might be a good time to kick that up again. And those efforts might lead into the future of revisiting updates to the crash form. I'm not saying that's imminent or anything like that, but certainly there's been a lot of talk of, what needs to be added or what's outdated. Is there too much in there? Things like that. That will probably take place over the next couple of years. Who knows what timeline will be. The crash form usually is not updated, but once every 15 years or so, 10 to 15 years. And but eventually we'll get there to the point where we'll have to update that. So that's another thing that's at least pertaining to the crash data that we've been talking about at STRAC.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Any other comments, or I think that we can move on. All right, great. Thank you both. I know I hadn't spoken to either of you about giving an impromptu talk today, but I appreciate you being able to step in. Next, I'd like to turn the floor over to Catherine Rush. Catherine, again, is the other senior safety planner here at DRCOG. She's been the project manager for our minor update for taking action on Regional Vision Zero. And she's got a lot of really interesting findings to share about what we're seeing in the crash data, and wanting to see if this is something that's kind of resonating with other local agencies or state agencies and other partners who are in the data. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Eric. Pull this up really fast. All right, so as Eric mentioned, we're in the process of updating our Regional Vision Zero plan. This presentation is not going to focus on the findings from our crash data analysis, but rather, or like the findings in terms of what the biggest safety issues are, but rather in terms of the quality of the crash data and challenges that were encountered as the plan was being developed. And so I know a lot of you have developed plans, are in the process of developing plans. So I want to see what resonates with you and where your sticking points are and if they are similar to ours. So it's going to be a little bit text heavy at first, which I apologize, but then we're going to have an activity at the end. So hold on for that. Let's see here. All right, so as many of you probably already know, we are updating our plan, and specifically some of our focus areas are updating our high injury network, so our roads with a disproportionate number of severe crashes, and our regional crash profiles, which are kind of target crash types or emphasis areas. And we are using more recent crash data from 2020 to 2024. We want the plan to help bring attention to high injury corridors, identifying existing and emerging crash types to target. The plan's also used to support grant applications and it takes a safe systems approach. So, safe roads, safe speeds, safe road users, safe vehicles, post-crash care. So in the process of particularly the regional crash profiles, we had to do significant cleaning of the crash data in order to glean insights. And so findings of the most common or most significant irregularities or issues, I think we can use this information and these findings to help educate law enforcement, as well as identify other ways to improve data quality in the future. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So we did not do this specifically for the plan, but we do, the DRCOG GIS staff does annually clean the crash data as it's received from CDOT. And this usually takes about a month of geocoding and correcting. They focus on fatal, serious injury, and pedestrian, bicycle, and motorcycle crashes. And just to give an example of like the challenges that they face, one agency, obviously a large agency, had 500 crash points in one location. Obviously that one location did not have 500 crashes. So they then had to manually review the data and place those crashes in the appropriate location. And that's just one agency's data. So Eric, I think is going to be talking about latitude and longitude and other, ways that strategies to focus on with this group, but certainly latitude and longitude and accurate locations is still a major priority and a major challenge. Another thing was significant underreporting of speeding. So if we just go off of the driver action field as it was reported, only 7% of these severe crashes were speeding related. So had an indication of speeding or too fast for conditions or racing. But if we actually look at the narratives of the crashes, we found an additional 6% were speeding related based off of the narrative. So the narrative mentioned maybe a high rate of speed or too fast or excessive speeding, or let's say they put in an estimated speed that the driver was going and it was more than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. But even with this additional cleaning, one could still think that speeding or speed is not a major cause of severe crashes. We know that's not the case. We know it's a key contributor to crash severity purely based off of physics. Newton's second law of physics provides the variables that impact the amount of force generated by a crash. The higher the force, the greater severity. And essentially, a crash does not become severe or cause serious injury or death without enough force or kinetic energy. So the variables that go into force include the vehicle's mass, the vehicle's velocity, which is typically expressed in meters per second or miles per hour, and the time it takes for the crash to occur. So this could be the time from when the vehicle starts braking, or it could be the time from when the crash starts. So velocity or speed is one of those four variables, the four being the change in velocity. So force equals mass times change in velocity over time. So speed is one of those four critical variables. An indication of speeding, when applicable, if speeding has occurred, is really important for indicating the need for roadway design changes, for enforcement programs, if any of you have speed cameras, for new legislation that could be locally or statewide, and also looking at vehicle technology improvements. It's really important to know if excessive speed played a role in the cause of crashes and in the severity of crashes. It's also interesting when it's provided in the narratives, the estimated speeds that were either estimated, or if the data was retrieved via warrant from a vehicle's event data recorder, can help us understand at what speed various crashes become severe and fatal. I think this helps both in the design of roadways as well as in reporting and analyzing crashes and investigating crashes. So for example, a rear end crash is typically, we found 50 miles an hour to be severe. A collision with object crashes, typically 40 to 45 miles per hour to be severe. 40 miles an hour is, I think, the typical speed that crash testing is done at. So that makes sense. Front to side crashes. Now, those can be severe at a slightly lower speed, and that's because there isn't as much protection on the side of the vehicles as there is on the front. Rollover crashes, we saw 65 miles an hour being a threshold that we saw severe injuries, and wrong way head on. That one, especially if both vehicles are going about the same speed, going to each other, 40 miles an hour is enough to be fatal. So takeaways for this. Investigating why speed isn't being reported. There seems to be an over-reliance on careless driving and reckless driving. I would like to get, Emily, I saw your hand, so I'll be back to you in just a second. I would like to get into more about why speeding isn't being indicated in the crashes. I think it could have to do with the fact that speeding is not as heavily penalized as a charge of careless driving and reckless driving. So for example, if you look at points taken off of a driver's license for different infractions, you have to go 20 miles an hour over the speed limit to have the same number of points taken off for careless driving. I don't think going 20 miles an hour over is careless. I think it's reckless, but then I could see why an officer would put careless, because it would actually basically be a higher charge for less speeding. So that's something that I would like to dig into more. Another one is encouraging officers to report speeding or too fast for conditions in these reports. So I said who would be responsible for this being law enforcement agencies. If you are representing a law enforcement agency, I would ask that you take these action items back and spread the word to your police officers and your agency. If you don't have any law enforcement on the call from your city or county or jurisdiction, I would ask that you try to reach out to any contacts that you have in your law enforcement and see if they can take up any of these action items. So another one is encouraging officers to estimate speed. So either via video analysis or skid mark analysis in cases of severe crashes, and then seeking a warrant to retrieve vehicle data in cases of fatal crashes. When the vehicle data was retrieved, we saw massively higher reported speeds than if it was just estimated or not reported at all. I think the two highest speeds that were reported in narratives was a vehicle going 152 miles an hour and another vehicle going, I think, 147 miles an hour. So there's significant speeding going on, and I think it would be very telling if that information was reported on more. Oh, I forgot the image. Underreporting of red light running. So red light running. Oh, wait, sorry, Emily, I saw your hand go up. Did you have a comment or a question? And then Cami after that?
Yeah, I guess it was about the speeds for like what is considered, going to result in serious or fatal. We actually our most recent fatal in Littleton, they were speeding, but they were also not wearing their seatbelt. And I wonder if that was something that you also looked at as like the lower the speed, though, and it was a broadside crash. And so those kind of three things combined, the vehicle sizes, all those things together ended up in this person not surviving the crash. And the police, were saying that if they had their seatbelt on, yes, it was a high rate of speed crash, like I think it was 65, but they might have survived it with the seatbelt. So I just was curious if that was something you looked at as well.
Yeah, great clarifying question. All of these speeds are assuming that the driver was wearing a seatbelt.
Or proper,
or proper restraint.
Safety equipment, yeah.
Yes, okay. And that it wasn't like a semi or, a garbage truck or something really, really heavy.
Well, you guys also like motorcycles, right? Like we're seeing definitely an uptick in motorcycle crashes, and those can be at those 35 miles per hour. But if they're not wearing a helmet or other safety protection, then, we're not seeing a survival rate there as well. So, okay, yeah. Just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, there was a motorcycle crash where a guy was standing still and the bike fell on him and it broke his ankle. So motorcycle crashes can be severe at 0 miles an hour. Yeah, I saw another hand go up.
It was me, but it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Is there Cami?
Oh, yeah, I saw Alyssa's hand go up after mine. I just wanted to make a comment about the next slide. You were just talking about what to talk to your officers about. And from my understanding too, officers are often can't report speeding because they can't prove it because the investigation hasn't been done yet. So I like the idea about putting estimated speed, but they're almost at risk if they do mark speeding and it's not, and like it can't be upheld, right? This is the crash report is that first snapshot. The crash report happens later, and this may be what Alyssa wants to talk about it when I saw her hand come up, but I think we want to be careful what and how we ask our officers to report something different or additional on the forms because of what they've been trained and what protects them as far as the legal investigation that is to potentially happen or follow. So knowing it's just their first snapshot, so an estimation might be a better way to approach it in sort of that additional narrative, because I don't know that they can, even if they suspect it, mark speeding unless it is with 100% without question a factor that they may not be able to determine when they just walk up on a crash. So Alyssa, you might be able to say that much better than I can, so I'll turn it over to you.
I wouldn't say better. I would say just like a different perspective. So, I would definitely say that, you know, driver actions are human contributing factors. I'm not looking at it right now, so I can't remember which one's which. But the suggests like speeding or going too fast for conditions and things like that, as well as the speed limit and or not the speed limit, the estimated speed box for each vehicle. They are officers, you know, first inclination, right? Like when the investigation ends up ultimately revealing, you know, maybe they weren't speeding or, you know, same with the DUI suspicion, like the toxicology suspicion, like it is suspected until it's verified. But you're not gonna, you know, suspect them of alcohol and then test them 6 days later. Like that's just not how the data really works in this particular case. Sorry, my brain is trying to connect to very uh different threads and I'm not doing a good job at it. But I would say that it's really the officer's like upfront opinion on what happened. Like it is genuinely a snapshot of the crash and verification, whether it's of the speed or of the toxicology, like that verification can come in an amendment. And it doesn't have to be, you know, held to such high scrutiny, I don't think.
I think I suspect you are probably right, Alyssa, only because there's such an inclination for officers to mark careless driving and reckless driving. Both of those are offenses, but we don't necessarily know if they're being charged with them. It's just, again, like the officer's assessment of what caused the crash. But I think that's something to talk about, like why I think I want to investigate this more.
Yeah, and one thing that I will definitely say is that in the process of us like cleansing the data, even if the officer says like speeding was a factor in the narrative, we do not go in and change the driver actions or anything like that. We won't even, like, if there's no speed limit listed or no estimated speed listed, we don't fill in those fields. We don't go look up what the speed limits on these roads are. All of that is given to us strictly by the officers because it is 1,000% their opinion and not our data to change. Like directions, movement, things to make the physics work, sure, but not the human aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Is that Jennifer, I think? Had her hand up.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Jennifer Carpenter with Michael Baker. Question for you, Alyssa, on the amendment that you mentioned. Is this something that is done within the crash report? Is it a separate file? Like, is it something that DRCOG and others that are reporting crashes would have access to? And I guess then the second part of that question would be, how often is it updated?
So the most common one is when a serious injury crash becomes a fatality, and you submit an amendment for to reflect that fatality. There are also instances where like you know, you get the verification of they had a blood alcohol level of 0.1 to whatever, and then you update the fatality, or you update the crash to indicate the actual charges. And I will say that it doesn't happen very often for the latter. Certainly it should happen for the serious injuries to fatality situation, just because we want to make sure that that important data is correct. And Dave, definitely hop in and add anything else if you need.
Oh, you said it right. I added some stuff in the chat, but I don't have anything to add.
All right, I saw a couple other hands up if somebody wants to jump in.
Yeah, I'll hop in real quick. I have a question that I guess largely for Alyssa and Cami, maybe based off Cami's comments, but also maybe I do see, I'm putting a lot of people on the spot today. I see Chief Eklers from Boulder County, if he's on and can maybe help with this. When it comes to that not being able to put speeding related or something like that, because it can't be proven, I guess we've also heard through these conversations with the consortium and through STRAC about things like impairment suspected and officers and troopers being encouraged to put that field down, even if they aren't necessarily able to prove. That's been a conversation that's come up where maybe some folks have not felt comfortable doing it, but the direction that I've heard through these conversations was that they should put that. So why would that necessarily be different to have an officer trooper select impairment suspected, even if they maybe aren't able to prove that, versus speeding as it? Is it really the framing of it as like suspected versus this is the factor as it might appear on the report? Is that where that's maybe additional higher level of confidence might be required?
It's so hard to quantify, because like when you're thinking about, and I'll specifically use the toxicology data just because I'm so ingrained in the subcommittees and all that stuff. We get the toxicology verification only for the fatalities, and we get those from the coroner. What we don't get is any verification of, any other crash, because then HIPAA gets involved, right? Because the people are still alive, although there's HIPAA stuff for, anyways. My point being, we're very much relying on the officer's opinion and their expertise, because one, they're the ones out there, seeing the crash. Two, this is their area of expertise. This is what they do. And I'm not gonna dispute the weather on a crash report. Unless it says it was raining and in the narrative it says that it was bright and sunshiny, then I may question it. But we very much rely on what the officers give us, and we trust them to make the because I don't want, oh, I'm gonna start rambling. I'll stop there.
I could jump in, Alyssa. It's sort of like we have to pick our battles. It's like
that one.
I mean, reviewing 100,000 crashes a year, you have to narrow it down to really what's most important to us. And these things are important to get accurate, of course, but is there enough there to draw a conclusion that speeding is a problem or impairment is a problem? I think there is. To get an exact number is certainly desirable, but I don't know. At some point, there's diminishing returns of how much time we invest to and dissecting each individual crash, and we do the best we can and try to make things the most accurate we can and try to fix things. But yeah, to go over every single crash with a fine-tooth comb is unrealistic at some point. So again, it's just like a prioritization of our resources on what we could do, and we'll try to improve on that for sure. But right now, it's still a bit of an uphill battle.
So I did have something else to add, if that's okay. So looking at, so I found it's an old copy, but it is the officer, like the training manual for the current DDR 3447 form. And there are actually 3 fields for speed. There's the speed limit, the estimated vehicle speed, and the driver's stated speed are all part of that form. And for the estimated vehicle speed, it does say very specifically that this is, an officer estimate, in lieu of just having the driver's statement. And I like the fact it does have a note. It says this information is used to develop traffic safety programs and is used by highway engineers to determine appropriate speed limits for a roadway, which is I think is a very, very good thing to have. So it is in there that this is an estimated speed that, as far as this report guidance is concerned, it does not need to be a proven speed. That's all.
All right, Emily, I know I saw your hand up. If you want to go ahead and put your comment or question in the chat, I think we just got to keep moving along for time's sake.
Also, Chief, if you
yeah.
want to speak.
Hello, I'm Jason Oakers. I work for the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, and I can speak a little bit for law enforcement perspective. So we have sheriff's offices typically don't do a lot of accidents. State Patrol does. We have 3 contract towns that we do accidents for. And I think there's probably a couple things. There was significant turnover in law enforcement probably 5 or 6 years ago. So most of our deputies, probably about half of them, have 3 years of experience, given that they don't investigate accidents on a daily basis. They also haven't been to a formal accident investigation class, which is something that they're lacking. And really, quite honestly, the time to get 80 deputies to a 1-week class is a significant undertaking, as you could imagine, while trying to meet minimum staffing. So I think that that's some of the barriers. And I also think that there probably is a barrier about estimating speed. I mean, if I come up to a crash and they've moved to the side of the road, I don't know how I can estimate that speed. I can't say they were going 80 or 70, just based on that damage and then statements. So I think there's probably an art to that's unless you're a trooper or somebody that investigates accidents on a regular basis, you may not have that ability to accurately estimate. My 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I know that this is, it certainly depends on the size and capabilities of the enforcement of the agency. Some have dedicated teams to, like traffic teams, that oftentimes lead the investigations, whereas, smaller ones just don't have that capacity. So, with all of these recommendations, it is also just based off of the capability of the agency. If there is the capability to consider some of these things, that's what we're asking. And if not, that's understandable as well. All right, so continuing on, this is another kind of education one for officers. So red light running should be indicated using a fail to stop a signal driver action, but there was more than 150 fatal and serious crashes that mentioned red light running in the narrative, but did not select this driver action. Usually they would select something like failed to yield or just careless driving. But correct reporting of this driver action is really important to develop targeted enforcement programs. So if you are considering red light running enforcement, having that field and having to not review all the narratives for it is really beneficial. And so this is another one where it's just conducting training with officers just to make sure that they select fail to stop at signal in cases of red light running. Next up is missing narratives. So 25% of our fatal and serious crashes, the data that we received from CDOT, who receives it from Department of Revenue, did not have a narrative. Narratives can be extremely important if we have questions about the location. Was the location, latitude, longitude correct? Were other fields filled out correctly? And also they can just really provide a lot of beneficial information about how the crash occurred and what could have caused it to be so severe. And so not having those can make understanding crashes a lot more challenging. Another challenge is that many narratives also have personal identifying information. This makes it hard, I think, or controversial to share narratives more widely. If you have, for example, somebody's driver's license number in the narrative, or their phone number, or their home address number, or their name in the narrative, that can be really problematic. So I wanted to provide an example of like what I consider, a good straightforward narrative, which is traffic unit 1 was westbound on Colfax Avenue with the intention to turn northbound. So based off of that direction, we can assume they're intending to turn left, northbound right. Northbound on Tabor Street, driver of TU1 was intoxicated and drove too fast for the turn, causing TU1 to crash into a fire hydrant on the northwest corner of this intersection. So we understand the lead up to the crash, we understand how the crash occurred, and we understand why the crash likely occurred. So kudos to this officer. So I have here a breakout of missing narratives by law enforcement agency. I am not trying to point fingers. I am trying to provide data so that it can be used in communication with these officers to try to improve things and encourage more narratives. So here's that list. If you see your agency on it, this is not everybody. I would say most agencies have some missing narratives. These are just the top based off of number that would fit on this slide. But if you see your agency on here, really appreciate it if you could look into these missing narratives. So strategies for addressing missing or improper narratives. I would say for agencies and the Colorado Department of Revenue, consider requiring officers to provide narratives for fatal and serious injury crashes. Not saying for all crashes. I know crash reporting takes a lot of time, but for crashes that are really serious, making sure that we have accurate information on those crashes is really important. Check to see if your agency is having transmission issues to the Department of Revenue. I know for example, if you know that you have narratives for pretty much all of your serious crashes, but you are on that list, for example, there may be a transmission issue going on. So that could be something to investigate. And then I think also just training officers on how to write a good narrative that does not include personal identifying information. So consider providing them examples and templates. That could be law enforcement agencies. It could also be if, the state ever gets a single electronic crash reporting system, that could be built into that system as well. All right, now going on to a couple challenges I saw with the assignment of first harmful event for certain types of crashes. And one of them is for certain types of left turn crashes. So how would you classify the first harmful event for the crash shown to the right? Would you say it's a front to side crash or a front to front crash? We saw it classified both ways a lot of times. So there was a lot of discrepancy with how this was classified, but it's one type of crash. And so there should be one type of classification for it. CDOT typically assigns it a crash type of approach turn, which is a kind of type of front to side crash typically. And the reporting manual indicates it should likely be a front to side crash, but it's unclear. There's not a great illustration. And so the takeaways or potential strategies for this is adding an illustration to the crash reporting manual to clarify how it should be categorized. Because even I think it should be front to side, but I'm not 100% sure. Once that's established, I think training officers or to avoid having to do that manual labor, adding illustrations or automated logic to electronic crash reporting systems. So essentially the training and verification happens in the system rather than needing staff time and those sorts of things. So another first harmful event type I wanted to address is crashes when a vehicle is aggressively changing lanes or changing lanes just generally. And it kind of happens in the manner shown to the right. So I most often found this on freeways, but it could also be, you know, approaching an intersection and a vehicle is wanting to turn right or something like this. So if you were to come to a crash and it happened like this, would you think to classify it as a front to side crash or a side to side same direction crash? There's a lot of discrepancy, as I said. CDOT typically assigns it as a side to side same direction from what I saw. But illustrations in the crash reporting manual kind of imply that it should be a front to side crash. But there isn't a clear like one-to-one illustration in the crash reporting manual. And so the takeaway for me was adding an illustration of the scenario to the crash reporting manual to clarify for officers how it should be reported. Alyssa, I saw you had your hand up.
Yeah, so I want to partially agree with you here that understanding like the sequence of events is important to us, but the actual crash type field is something that is generated by CDOT. And the way that we look at it, and this is where like cleansing the crash data and like determining the crash type is more of an art than a procedural science. The harmful event sequence is, with the exceptions of like bicyclist, pedestrian, but like the front to side, front to front, front to rear, like all that stuff, that is the physical manifestation of how the vehicles came together. The driver movements and directions is what determines like the placement of the vehicles, and then the crash type is kind of taken from those two pieces of information and then describes the type of crash that would have, Dave may have to fill in for me here, where they have the same or similar mitigation things. Like, for example, like if there's a lot of approach turns at a signal, they may choose to either extend the length of the green arrow or extend the length of the lane, stuff like that. Dave, please save me.
Yeah. I mean, the crash type is to address the ambiguity, I hope I said that right, of a crash that's front to side or front to front. That's the same crash type, like the approach turn. It involves a vehicle turning left and a vehicle crashing into a vehicle coming from the opposing direction. It can be front to side or front to front. I mean, those designations are most likely correct, but the mitigation for that crash type, you have to go a little bit deeper into figuring out what's the problem there. And that's why we issue that crash type field as an interpretation of using that to determine what's the best mitigation strategy to address that crash type, in spite of the vagueness of the first harmful event for two vehicles. And that's just the reality. That's how the model minimum uniform crash criteria has crashes coded. But it's up to us to go to that next step, which we do with the crash type, to make that information usable into a mitigation that we can apply there.
Right. And I think that you said something key there, which is make it usable. I think we could start out by making it more usable and having it more clean. Because I think my challenge is it not this essentially the same harmful event, regardless of where the vehicle like angle hits the other vehicle?
Not necessarily. Yeah. So
like what I found was I'm not going to do anything. Like there's no implication for me if a vehicle hit in this situation a little bit more front to side or a little bit side to side. It's still the same manner of collision.
Well, and that's where we really value the narrative kind of specifying like what was going on preceding the crash. So,
And I had
example-
challenges with the crash types too, analyzing them, which is why I decided to go with the first harmful event instead, just because splitting up like the way approach, turn, and broadside is split up is just confusing to me and a lot of people.
So here's a scenario that I can think of. You have traffic on I-25 and the person doesn't notice, and instead of they slam on their brakes, and in order to avoid a rear end, they veer to the left and hit like a guardrail or a tree. In those cases, we may say that the crash type, oh man, I think I'm actually making a bad example that isn't technically true, but you'll get the point. We may call that a rear end because that's, even with the avoidance maneuver, like that's what the crash would have been. And now I'm thinking, example.
Here's another example. A vehicle's on a road. There's a wild animal on the road. Vehicle swerves to the right to avoid it, crashes into a tree. The crash type we put for that is wild animal, not the tree, even though the vehicle did hit the tree, not the wild animal, but the wild animal was the problem there, not the tree.
And the first event would have been an O2, which is an other non-collision, because it was the avoidance of the deer. So your first event and your crash type and your most harmful event would be 3 different things.
Yeah, and I found that I wanted to focus on first harmful event because I wanted to know what caused the crash to first happen or be severe versus like most harmful event. But I think having that option for analysts to choose from is valuable. So having good, at least first harmful event and most harmful event data is valuable. And I think my still point stands, which is this exact crash, as shown here, will be coded different ways. And I think there's an opportunity to address that discrepancy.
Yeah, and whether it's front to side or side to side, the issue with this example is a lane violation. So again, crash type is the interpretation of a first harmful event, vehicle direction, and vehicle movement. That's what's all considered into the determination of a crash type. I don't know of any other way of doing it. I mean, maybe there is, but that's certainly how we've been interpreting our data in such a way.
Yes, I think there's an opportunity then to maybe for takeaways to have further conversation about defining how certain types of crashes should be classified, to make it easier for analysts and to require less cleaning, I guess, on the back end. Okay, moving on. So missing non-motorist data. So for 28% of severe crashes involving non-motorists, the crash report stated that the non-motorist action was no contributing action. There's no really other field that clearly indicates what the non-motorist was doing leading up to the crash. So were they walking along the roadway? Were they in the roadway? Were they crossing the roadway like at an intersection? Or were they, darting across the street away from an intersection? The non-motorist action is really the only field that provides that data. And so without a narrative for those 28% of crashes that don't have no contributing action, we don't know what the non-motorist was doing when the crash occurred. There is an option to have unknown, which at least, I understand that, like, let's say there's a hit and run where you truly don't know what the non-motorist was doing before the crash, and there was no witnesses. There's an unknown option. So my takeaway from this was, as part of the next update to the crash form, consider removing the no contributing action from the list of non-motorist actions. There is an unknown option if it's not known, but otherwise, if it is known, being able to state what the non-motorist was doing. I understand that there is a movement, a non-motorist movement, but it's things like, it's the same as the vehicle movement field. It talks about passing and slowing and like weaving and stuff. And so it's not really applicable. It doesn't tell me what a pedestrian was doing. And so that's where this non-motorist action field is really important. Yeah.
I did have a quick question on that, Catherine. It's like, are those for where like the pedestrian or non-motorist is at fault, or is it like if they're not at fault, is it not okay for them to not have a contributing action? I mean, if
So
they're
that's
just walking.
the problem with the form, I think, and the data is the fact that I think the issue is that the non-motor, like, yes, they can be not at fault, but the problem is that this is the only field that states what they were doing. So without knowing, like, were they walking along the road? Were they crossing the road? We have no idea what they're doing. So that's why I understand why officers are putting no contributing action, because they're like, oh, well, they weren't doing anything wrong. The problem is that that's the only field that tells us what the non-motorist was doing at all, even if they weren't at fault. And so perhaps then it's an issue, like, it's not just about removing the no contributing action from the list of non-motorist actions. Maybe it's more about retooling the non-motorist movement field to better describe actions that non-motorists might take.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. That I'm still trying to wrap my head around that one, but I do see some logic there for sure. Thanks.
Yeah. Again, it's just, if there's no narrative, we have no idea what the non-motorist was doing. Lack of causal information about fixed object crashes. So we had to do a lot of data mining and cleaning to try to begin to understand why vehicles are leaving the roadway, and it's resulting in a fatality or serious injuries. We know, if a vehicle collides with a tree, is oftentimes severe, but why are they leaving the roadway and colliding with the tree? What's causing that to occur? So an example of cleaning that had to occur is vehicle movement frequently did not match the description in the narrative. Or, so for example, the narrative might state, TU1 was out of control and collided with the concrete barrier, but then the vehicle movement would say going straight. Or it would say, TU1 or like TU2 swerved to avoid TU1 braking, but it would say, going straight rather than swerve avoidance. Or another one was, it would say the car was negotiating a curve and the road contour curve field would say the crash was at a curve, but the vehicle movement would say going straight. And so it just made mining that data more challenging with these discrepancies. It made it harder to understand why crashes were occurring. Most of these severe crashes where the first harmful event was collision with an object have no clear reason for the crash occurring beyond careless driving or reckless driving. What about the careless and reckless driving caused them to leave the roadway and collide with an object? I think understanding that is really important for improving safety. These fixed object crashes are a huge percentage of crashes. And right now, it's just very difficult to know what to do to address them. So we looked at, speeding or too fast for conditions, but that only attributed to 15% of these crashes. We looked at distraction. That only was attributed to 6.5% of crashes. And then for 27%, the contributing factor was unknown, not observed, or there was no contributing factor. So again, why are vehicles leaving the roadway and why is it resulting in a fatality or serious injury? So a takeaway is encouraging officers to conduct further investigations to understand the root causes of these collision with object as the first harmful event crashes. So for example, we know that 50% of these crashes are occurring between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. when traffic is the lightest. So I would assume that there's likely underreporting of speeding, intoxication, fatigue, distraction. I know a lot of times that can be hard to suss out, but if there are opportunities to further investigate some of these crashes, I think that would be really valuable for better understanding them. Encouraging officers to report on the specific factors beyond simple reckless driving or careless driving or lane violation. I don't know. Again, I think a lot of this requires further conversations about the challenges with these takeaways. But I think just identifying them or starting the conversation will hopefully lead to more conversations. And a way to avoid putting, more workload on officers is potentially adding logic validations to electronic crash reporting systems to promote consistency between fields. And that could be done by law enforcement agencies, or, if the state creates their own electronic crash reporting system, that could be built into the state system. Okay, with that, I'm going to start a Menti survey to ask you about what your thoughts are. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think that's, maybe we can save this,
okay.
or if we want to go through it quickly, because I'm going to need to probably at least 20 minutes for my update.
Yeah. Okay. We can do this later then.
Okay. All right. Cool. Thank you. Unless was there a couple in there that we want to just do right away? I know we're looking at it earlier today.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay. All right, so let me share my screen. Thank you all so much. That was amazing. I really loved all that discussion. I think that was incredibly useful. So I'm glad that we had a lot of conversation there. I do want to just spend a couple minutes here talking through a little bit of the what we have been working on, share an update for what activities that we at Dr. Cog have done, especially and several of many of the partners here on the call today. I just need to. So with today's conversation, really just want to talk a few minutes about what's the report had set out to change, some of the overarching recommendations and strategies, talk through sort of the current consortium approach, what we've been working on, share a timeline for where we are at for a number of the strategies. They had been broken down into short-term, medium, and long, and let's talk about where we are in that framing. Cover the three really high priority results that came from the 2025 workshop that we had with this group, and talk about some of the potential benefits and some of the potential challenges to each of those approaches that we've learned over the last about year of research and engagement. I'll do a very brief recap of some of all of the medium priority results that came out of that workshop, and then just posit some ideas about how we could use the rest of this short-term window effectively. So the report, the first part of it really was kind of a report out for what we had to cover with our 405C grant, but kind of the heart of it was these 6 recommendations and the strategies that followed beneath each. I tried to group them here. The first 5 were really kind of about, the actual tangible improvements to either collection, breaking that down into different elements such as location or other critical elements that had a little bit more detail, looking into the way that the crash data is processed and some of the validate checks that go through it so that it is an efficient process, and also looking at how we can make the data more accessible, more useful for the analysts and others who end up using the data. And the last one here, just kind of off to the side, more institutionalized, just kind of how this group can be maintained and sufficient or self-sufficient. And, you know, we're still here, we're still doing great. And so I think that's a testament in itself. Currently, what we're focusing on directly is really looking at those high and medium priorities that were established. There are definitely other strategies that were in the plan that maybe while they didn't get a higher medium priority rating from that working group meeting we had, that we are working on, and we know that other partners in the group are working towards. So I will give an opportunity to share about that as well. But one thing I do want to share is that most of the short-term strategies, whether or not they're high or medium priority, are pretty much in progress. So there's been tangible work on a lot of these. Some things, again, there's conversations going on that are ad hoc that I think we can, as a group, work towards formalizing a little bit, which I'll speak to. But I really feel pretty impressed and proud of the work that's being done by this group. There's a lot of energy and there's a lot of commitment towards improving the traffic records on all sides. And so I just want to give that shout out. And I know that this work is really difficult. It's going to be hard to see the outcome of work products that could take months or years to see, but there's definitely a lot of talented folks who are doing a lot of work here. Another thing I want to mention too is that DRCOG has been a regular attendee for STRAC. So that is a forum where we've been able to advocate for many of the strategies laid out in the plan, take what we have heard from our member governments and maybe other organizations who are not commonly in those spaces to bring to the state. And it's a really collaborative group. We're happy that we're able to participate in that and share out those consortium priorities with those state agencies. We've been continuing our engagement with law enforcement. Again, I'm pleased to see Chief Eckers here today, and there may be some others. I haven't had a chance to check the whole chat window in a while, but we did do a survey of law enforcement agencies last year that we had a pretty good response rate from across the states, and that was really kind of focused on whether agencies were doing an electronic crash reporting system, if they were just having them scanned or sent into DOR, kind of the pros and cons of their systems, the costs. I've been working on a lot of follow-up. I've been working on following up with agencies. Even though we did that in the fall, there's still a lot of questions that we have unanswered, and wanting to try to get more information from some of the other agencies that maybe if they didn't take that survey, if it didn't hit their inbox, that we have connected with. And so that's one thing I'm really focusing on. I'm planning to focus on this year is, again, really bringing more of those law enforcement voices into the conversation, because we know that that's, you know, a really critical element to this. And we want to make sure that we're responding to the real on the ground challenges that are out there. And then one last thing I want to mention here is just that keep an eye out for grant funding opportunities. In this space, there's not been a ton of really unique ones. There was some from NHTSA a few years ago that we weren't in a position to really advocate for. But one that is of note is the 405C Traffic Records Improvement Grant. And this is the grants that originally had started off the Crash Consortium kind of in that pilot testing phase. But that is likely to be one of the best opportunities we may have to seek funding to implement any changes to the systems that we may see as a benefit. So the plan literally laid out for each of the strategies, whether they're short-term, medium-term, or long-term plans, and the number of years to implement. So the original plan came out in October of 2024. It's based off of the federal fiscal calendar, because that's the 405C grant is a federal, again, not national or NHTSA grant. So we've kind of just based it off of that structure still. But looking at a short-term 2-year timeline, that really brings us up to September of 2026. So about 6 months from now. And, I'd say, again, for most of the strategies that we have as short-term, there's been some measurable progress on them and at least a lot of conversation on them. So pleased about that. But then also just to note that even though maybe things were listed as medium term, they're still important. And we're right now in a good spot to be able to utilize 405C for that. So if we were to come to a consensus that DRCOG or DOR or CDOT or some of our local governments or law enforcement agencies would be looking to that grant for whether it's some sort of validation system set up, more requirements in drives, which I'll talk about, an API to connect software, going down the path of looking towards that state system that's been talked about. There was a window for doing this that would be basically the application would be in the spring of 2027. And then we would see if we were approved for that funding. And 405C is a 1-year grant. So we would be able to take that, if we're approved for whatever grants we would potentially apply for, the opportunity for that funding period would be that October 2027 through September 2028, which is directly in line with our medium-term timeframe. So to me, that actually is very good news. I think that means that, there's been momentum that's been carried forth through these types of large group meetings, but also through some of the smaller scale conversations or one-on-one conversations even that we've been having, and we know that partners in this room have been having. So I think that, again, one thing for this year that we'll want to do is really formalize what we really need to move this conversation to the next level. If that is going to take some sort of funding, we believe that the 405C is probably going to be the best opportunity for that. And again, we're getting set up to hit that in a good stride. As I mentioned at our 2025 February workshop, we laid out all of the 39 strategies from the final report in 2024 and had stakeholders kind of rank them as far as their priority, give us feedback on who they think might be a good individual or organization really to be involved, barriers that they foresee that may come up to address these. And the 3 of the strategies that really rose to the top clearly, and this is truncated down, they were more detailed than this, but not great for a slide deck, but requiring certain fields that are critical to CDOT and other analysts. This includes things like the location, latitude and longitude, vehicle movement, vehicle direction, road location, road description, things like that. Some of these are improving, as we've heard from CDOT and DOR over the years, but there's still fields that take a lot, that sometimes can take work from the staff there to process. So really the idea there, how can we get those in so that we're able to not need to spend so much time on the processing side. Similarly, working with this group or working with others through law enforcement agencies, the records management system providers, or other crash data vendors they have, DOR, CDOT, to enhance those required fields. Very similar in wording to the first one, but also noting these logical validations. And that is kind of where it comes in, where the data source that's coming from the RMS or the software provider into the state is what is expecting. We've heard from Alyssa before, and I think also from just other partners, that sometimes the data just isn't connected right. The fields are not right. The names are not correct. And so agencies are collecting the data, but there's some sort of transmission error along the line. And so that's kind of what that's all about, wanting to kind of nip that in the bud as much as we can, because this data is incredibly important. It can be collected at great risk to the officers and troopers on the ground. And so we want to make sure that, we're honoring that. And if that data is available, if it's there, that we're not losing it simply through a misattribution of the data field or the data name, field name. And the other high priority strategy that was listed out, and there was kind of two under this heading, but I'm just put into this, is that researching and consolidating statewide crash reporting into a single application. This is something that we've been researching over the last year. We had, if you were with us for our September 2025 meeting, we had a really interesting presentation from the Iowa Department of Transportation on their system, just as an example of something that's out there that has been implemented across that state and is used in multiple states across the country. There's certainly others out there, and we are exploring different options, how that might look, whether developing something or acquiring something, but we're still, again, researching this, seeing how that could be a potential option or solution to some of these challenges that Catherine has shared today and that we've talked about previously. I've kind of spoken about a little of this already, so I'm not going to linger on this too long. But really, the main benefits for the enhanced requirements and validations is, fewer data inconsistencies between agencies because you're getting more of that those completed records in. That data that's getting to DOR from the agencies in its full form and not losing anything along the way. And ideally, having less manual work that needs to be done on the back end, whether that's less hand keying at the agency at DOR or by the work by the contractors at CDOT who are looking through the data. And really just how can we use all these individuals' time better? So if there's ways to improve the data as it comes in, that means that other work can be done with that. There are some challenges to this approach though. And this is something that hopefully we'll be able to have a presentation on this soon from DOR to get into much more detail about how this system works and some of the opportunities and challenges with it. But changing any requirements for what DOR can accept will require changes to the system called Drives, which is at DOR. And that has been in code freeze for a while. It's been under development for some updates. It's in a testing phase now, and there's several years of updates, several years worth of updates. Not necessarily it's going to take several years, but several years worth of updates that have come from the Colorado General Assembly that DOR rightfully must implement first. And so that puts us out at least into next year. Based on my understanding, but again, it sort of aligns with that time frame I just talked about with the 405C. So some of these things, while the progress may seem slow, we're operating in a system, and so operating with the constraints we have there. Another challenge with this is just acknowledging there's a balance between having the number of requirements or validation checks and with the on-the-ground experience of officers and troopers. We want to have the highest quality data we can for to make the traffic safety decisions that many of us are here for. However, there is a realistic balance between what we can expect, traffic units or officers, patrol officers who are completing the reports to capture when they're filling out the DR 3447 or any future updates. So that's going to require a lot of, I think it's going to require a lot of engagement with our law enforcement community, with our local governments and with the states. But it's very critical and just something that I definitely want to acknowledge here. And finally, kind of in a theme throughout, and you'll see this on the next slide too, but kind of an uncertain time frame for this and needing to engage multiple stakeholders on this. It's kind of been the theme throughout this. There's not a one size fits all approach necessarily that any single agency or stakeholder can implement. Anything we want to do is going to require thoughtful engagement and feedback from multiple organizations. I'm also not going to spend a ton of time on this one, but since we talked about this before and we plan to bring this up again likely at our next meeting, but the statewide electronic crash reporting application that Catherine mentioned as an idea, or that we've talked about, has really come out of these conversations with other states and other and looking into what other states' practices are. Great idea for this is really, if we have a consistent method for collecting that data, there should be the data should be able to be more consistent as it's brought in. Could require less manual cleaning or data entry by folks at DOR and CDOT, or even at the local agencies that are using data from their police departments directly. One cool thing about having a single system would be that, you know, training resources could be tailored directly towards it. Alyssa did share a link to some of the resources that the STRAC had prepared last year, some training recent videos. And they're really high quality and they go into how the report should be filled out. But one thing is that they're not really tailored into how it would actually look like on the application or form that your officer trooper is working with. And so if there was a single system out there, there would be the opportunity to have consistent training resources that even reflects what the app looks like. Again, something that can be pushed out at large to local agencies with the law enforcement liaison partners we have at the Highway Safety Office. And similarly, if there were updates to the form that needed to be done, we would be looking at updating one system versus tracking down 10 plus software vendors who would need to implement those changes into their applications. Of course, there are challenges. There are some challenges. One similar one, again, the uncertain time frame, the number of stakeholders need to be engaged. This is not going to be the last time we talk about this as we learn more. But one of the bigger ones is kind of the decisions about ownership of it, maintenance of the system, how much it's going to cost to develop or acquire and maintain is uncertain. Of course, there are high budgetary constraints at the Colorado General Assembly this year. We're not going to this is not an assembly question this year, but I think that we can expect future years to likely have similar challenges. So really getting creative about if something like this were to come about, how it would be funded is something we need to look into. And then again, with the engagement with law enforcement, we need to make sure that even if we have a app that is free and free to use and checks all the boxes for what our troopers have told us they're interested in for an application to help them complete the form, recognizing that there is likely the need to build APIs between a state form and the records management systems that they use. We're not really expecting something that's going to replace the full-on records management systems used by local law enforcement agencies. So anything that, and they will need to keep a record of the crash in their data. So that's one thing that we'll be looking into is how those APIs could be developed. So to let them use a system if it's adopted, but still have it work with their record management systems that connect with the rest of their data. As for the medium priority strategies, there was 5, and I'm going to go through these much quicker. But really encouraging law enforcement collaboration, engineers and planners. That's a really encouraging practice that we've seen with many of our local agencies through this process. And even in the chat, Emily from Littleton was talking about some of the work that is being done there. We are still having conversations with local agencies about their conversations, and we've heard how some of our planners, engineers have worked with their law enforcement agencies to suggest different ways to collect the data or work with it, or again, to understand their processes, and just noting that this is a back and forth. So continuing to encourage that. Again, this education and training on latitude and longitude. I think that the video produced by STRAC last year does a really excellent job of this. So if anyone hasn't seen that, please take a look at that. And if you are a local agency on the call and would like to share those videos out with your law enforcement, that would be really, really useful for us as a group, I think. There was an idea to coordinate with members to see if a license to some sort of a regional software vendor for crash analysis is desired. This is something that, again, it's sort of uncertain with time frame, with funding. There are definitely a few in the region that we know that member governments have used. The state has historically had a system or offered a system, and they've gone through a process for trying to select a new one. And so we were able to participate in that process, not as a voting member, but as a subject matter expert. And the state, well, they don't have a contract yet with the vendor. They've chose through their competitive process. And I can't speak to anything beyond that. But given the time frame with which we expect that to take, and how long it would take maybe a similar process to take place here at DRCOG, I am comfortable with kind of seeing how that process plays out. But again, anything this can be brought up, and we can talk any other time. So if anyone wants to talk about this further, just please reach out anytime, and we can see if there is still a desire for that. Touched on this training element a little bit. Specifically as it relates to our data, we have our dashboard, we have our files online. If anyone has any questions about how to use that data, what's in it, please just reach out directly. We're happy to share anything that happy to share anything that we have, or any resources that would make that more useful for you. And then last thing here, again, requiring law enforcement to include latitude and longitude, along with one other location method. So this was brought up by a stakeholder noticing that some agencies were doing a good job of having location information, but not latitude and longitude. Some were having latitude and longitude, but no other corroborating location information. So really wanting to have both, at least two ways to identify a crash location, both mainly to verify the location for sure, and to have that high of accuracy and confidence in the location as possible. Again, any requirement like this would need to go through that process that I discussed earlier, but wanted to highlight that the conversation that's been around that. So really the last thing that I want to share, I know we're getting close to time, so I appreciate everyone still hanging in here, is how can we use the rest of the short-term window effectively? So, and by short-term window, I really mean that through September of this calendar year. So I think that I really love the conversation that we had today throughout Catherine's presentation. It was good to hear all the different perspectives and answers in real time to some of these ideas. But I think that a little bit of some of this work can be moved forward effectively too in smaller groups. And so there's some specific issues that have been called out in the plan, such as underreporting of impairment or non-motorist types of crashes, but also just, I think a lot of this law enforcement engagement, most of what we've been doing has been one-on-one with agencies and officers or chiefs. So again, having some of these smaller groups that might be able to bounce ideas in a format that can be more conducive than a large group meeting at times. An idea for this would be just to meet a couple of times over the next few months. I would, if anyone has a topic that they're particularly keen on talking about or getting down to, I want to reach out to me, but there's a few that I have in mind that I'll be reaching out to some agencies and some of our law enforcement partners to talk about. really small commitment, I feel, a couple times a month or a couple times a week. I apologize. A couple times over the next few months. So not necessarily even a standing subcommittee type of meeting situation, but something like a minor working group to bring comments back to the full consortium after some more in-depth conversation. I mentioned this ad nauseum already, but continue to talk with our law enforcement partners, continuing this research on the statewide system. One ask I do have, though, is that if you are a local agency on this call with us and your law enforcement partners are not here, or you don't see them on the email list that are on the calendar event, if you could connect us with them, that would be really useful. I feel like we've had a really great response from the law enforcement that we have talked with, but sometimes it's just been tricky to get in touch with the right person. So whenever we've reached out, we've always had really productive conversations, and we've learned a lot. I think both directions. It's more about making that connection. And so if I may be reaching out as well after this for some of the agencies that maybe I just haven't made the right connection yet. And so if you get an email from me sometime soon, that's probably likely what it would be. And then sort of the last thing I think that what we could work on, and maybe this is one of those kind of small group idea I can help with, is revising that report structure. Some of the strategies are a little bit, maybe it's a little clunky in some ways. One thing that I think the report is lacking a little bit is having clearly defined achievable objectives for some of them. Some of these measures we don't have a good baseline for. And so we'll be working to get that baseline established, see if there's actionable steps that we can set forth. And so, again, I will be reaching out to partners about that soon. I know we're right at time. I have just a couple more things. Also plan to send out a version of the strategies that we have, and sort of some notes on the progress, the time frame for them, and some initial ideas of where involvement could be with those. So I'll be sending that out in a follow-up email. It will be a locked document, but I'm hoping to set it up so that you'd be able to provide comments. But again, as with everything, if you have any questions or any thoughts, any suggestions, anything that relates to crash data, we're all here. We've all been here for an hour and a half at this point. This is a super tuned in group. Please just reach out. I'm happy to meet and talk about any of this with you. Catherine and I have had great conversations with many partners in the room here. So please just reach out, and we will be happy to glean from your ideas and see where we can go forward from there. Just to close, next meeting is set for July 30th. At that, I'm hoping to have a fuller picture of some of this research that we've been doing to share with you, and really get us set up to a spot where we can have those more definable goals and objectives, get set up to be in a spot for many of these short-term goals to be concluded by the fall. And as we get into October and early next year, when we would be in that space where we'll be looking for funding for implementing some of these medium to long-term solutions we've been talking about, that's when we can really make that decision, make that call. So we've done a lot of the really hard work of seeing what the system's like, what the resources are, what the constraints are. We're still learning, but I think we're going to be coming to you in the next meeting, especially in the next meeting and the next and following, to really formalize those next official steps on if there's funding for a important project, which agency can lead that up, which agency with support from others to apply for that grant, set up that program, work through that, whatever their processes are. So just keep that in mind. We will be continue this conversation. And with that, I just want to again thank you all for joining us. I learned a lot, actually. I already have a lot of notes written down from our conversation. I hope you all learned something too. And again, if there's any questions or comments about how we can move some of these strategies forward or any other ways to collaborate more effectively, please just reach out to me or me and Catherine directly, and we're happy to set something up. All right, and I'll leave, and our emails are here on the screen. I'll leave that for you, and we look forward to talking soon.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Catherine. Bye.